Thank you for spending your time, to join this talk. In fact, this is actually the one of the best time to talk about this, and also is the worst time to talk about, healthcare facilities when it comes to spread of infection. Today, the things that I'm going to go through, all right, we'll be looking at our present city where we look at the core principle of containment and isolation. We look at what is pandemic crisis. We'll define what is the pandemic. We look at how we can manage in terms of during a pandemic situation. We look at how we should be transforming this fight, take on COVID-19 and how we should fight it, and what Schneider can do when it comes to remote services, and also what are the resources available today to everyone. All right. So along the way, this slide itself or this presentation, please do not take it that it's only used for COVID-19. It's actually meant for now during the emergency period, as well as the principle that I'm going to share with everyone today can be brought beyond COVID-19, which is where we should be looking at. In the short term is COVID-19. In the long term, we should be looking at healthcare as a whole, right? Every year, I think the economists, most of you should know, right? They actually run a survey that looks at how are the livable cities, what are the best livable cities on earth. Among all of us here today, the 100 over participants that we are living in some of the best cities in the world, all right? And how they look at it is that they have 5 categories to look at, and one of the important one is healthcare, all right? When they look at healthcare, they look at a lot of things. They cover a lot of the market trends that they have, look at how we deal with the different problems that we have. Very often, these are the things that you have seen or you can read off in your all your magazines and so on. This is nothing new. But there's one very specific area that very few cities in the world, even economies themselves, would try to avoid. But it is something that we are seeing very, very well today, which is known as chronic diseases. In healthcare, when it comes to chronic diseases, it is the worst to tackle. Any city that is able to tackle this in very good terms will be classified as one of the best places to live on earth. And today, unfortunately, you and I, we all encounter one of these, and we are seeing one of the picture of the many pictures that we are seeing, and the name is known as COVID-19. If any one of you today who doesn't know what COVID-19 is all about, please drop me an email right after this, all right? It's very important that we understand all this. So the battle that we can take towards COVID-19 is only healthcare. And in healthcare, we have to really, really understand. And let's start off with what we should be looking into healthcare. What is the core principle or core function, especially when it comes from Schneider? Healthcare, we cannot have any interruptions. I think by today, we should all understand that, all right? If there's something were to happen, if something were to go wrong, life is lost, all right? You cannot lose power, you cannot lose air conditioning, you cannot lose any kind of flow in terms of operations, from delivering the patient from the doorstep of the hospital down to the intensive care unit. Interruption is one thing that we should not have, all right? And in a hospital, every day is extraordinary. Just to give an example, like today, 1 month, 4 months back, or more exactly, 3 months and probably 10 days ago, all right? On that one particular day in Wuhan, a patient was admitted to a hospital. Today, the whole world know what this is all about. So every day is different. Every day we are reading new things, new discoveries. So in a hospital, every day is extraordinary. We cannot treat every day like yesterday. All right. This is what Schneider is always very conscious about. Every day we must be ready. We never know what's going to come. So if you look at these 3 principles itself, it's very common, we all know, but how do we achieve it is something that is going to take us not only now, but down the line in future. We are in healthcare. If everyone is within healthcare can understand this and bring it beyond, we can do our part for the city that we lived in, all right? So in Schneider, we are serving healthcare every day, treating it as an extraordinary day, all right? So let's go into what the main topic that we have today. In a hospital is no different from any other building. Honestly, you can actually compare today's hospital with a hotel, 5-star hotel, in fact, if not for the place that we call critical rooms. All right. In the critical rooms, that is the battleground that we have between life and death. And this is the room that makes the difference of a hospital compared to a 5-star luxury hotel. When it comes to critical room control, we always talk about containment and isolation. What is containment? What is isolation? I think today, 90% of us, we are already facing these 2 things, like it or not. All right. I myself, for one, is that I'm already being contained in my own home, in my own living room now for the last 3 weeks. All right, I'm isolated from the world. Okay, not knowing whether I've got COVID-19 or not, I'm already being contained and isolated from the rest in order to control the viruses. In a hospital, we know people who are already being infected by COVID-19. So it's more important that we contain and isolate them. How do we do it? The principles of critical room control is we must have reliable and uninterruptible power supply. When we say energy, we always feel that it's only power supply. In fact, it's not. Not forgetting we need water, we need air. So the word for it is not only power, but it should be energy supply, reliable and uninterruptible energy supply to those critical rooms. Like I went on earlier, containment and isolation. Being health people, we actually isolate first, then we contain. But in a hospital where we already know where the virus is, we should contain it first. Then we do the isolation. Either way, containment and isolation is very, very important. We need to make sure that we capture the virus, or we capture the COVID-19, or we capture any other kind of pandemic or viruses or bacteria. Contain it, isolate it, then hopefully we can destroy it. Within all containment area, environmental control is very important. For example, if you're staying in your office, if your office is hot, humid, you will never be comfortable. In a critical room, it is more critical when a patient is already weak. The environmental condition, if it's not being controlled proper, you can actually cause the patient to have more stress. The recovery is even worse. Not to mention the more important thing are the healthcare personnel. If they are under stress, no one is going to take care of the patient. Access and restriction. I think today we should all already understand that we need to make sure that areas that public is not allowed to access, make sure they are being blocked. Proper restriction is in place. Lastly, of course, surveillance and visualization. Whatever happens without visual, without the eye to see it, it's very difficult for us to actually deal with the situation or the pandemic. All right. So if you look at this, these are the 5 critical elements that we need to understand, that we need to apply within a critical room control. Again, like I mentioned, this is purely what I'm going to share today are purely the principle before we look at specific solutions. All right. Some of you who are not probably in the healthcare, which is joining us today, welcome. This is the critical room that we normally would see in a hospital. We talk about operating theater, operating room. Most of you would know. All right. More of you may also understand what is intensive care unit. And today from newspapers and so on, you sure would have heard of the word isolation room. These are the areas that where we make sure that the critically ill patient are kept away from the public. One less known area that people might not know that is critically important is laboratory. I think COVID-19 today have exposed a very critical room within a hospital that most of us have actually ignored, which is the laboratory. Today, one of the way to win COVID-19 or any pandemic down the line again is to make sure that we have the right facility to test and make sure to find who is infected, who is not. WHO, I think in its report 2 weeks back, has already mentioned any country who can do proper testing and proper validation of patients will win the war faster than countries that cannot. And the way and the place where they can do this is within a laboratory. So these are the 3 critical areas or critical rooms that in any hospital we should take care and we should take note of. There are many other areas defining into different smaller ones, but these 3 are the main ones that we all see today, right? So let's delve into more deeply when we talk about the principle of isolation. Power quality and reliability, what do we look at? I think Schneider, we all know that we are actually a power company. If we do not talk about power and we cannot make sure that the power is reliable to a critical room, we should not be calling ourselves Schneider Electric. So let's dwell a little bit deeper into it. Within a critical room, we need to provide power. And how do we provide power? We have to take from the grid, bring it into the building to the incomer, connected it down to step down to the what I call a switchboard, down to the switch gears, down to the smaller ones, down to the final equipment. We have the capability, we have the product, and we have the solution to do all that. I'm not here to tell you how a hospital should be connected. You should be working with the designers of the hospital when it comes to electrical power, but we do have the knowledge to advise them what is the right way to do it. How many incomers should be there? Where is the ATS supposed to be put? How should we do it? We are very, very good in standards. Electrical is one of the most, It's one of the most regulated industry in the world. You have IEC, you have NEMA standards that we need to follow. In Schneider Electric, we comply, and actually we are one of the on board with the IEC standards, which we can share with all the designers to make sure that their design complies internationally. Of course, in America, we talk about NEMA. We are also familiar with that. So what I'm trying to say here is that when it comes to power, we do have most of the knowledge to connect the energy to those equipments. But by being able to just supply power is not good enough. We need to look at reliability. We need to look at quality. All the power that needs to be monitored, we must look at the quality. For example, within a critical, especially on an operating theater, just take a simple thing like the lighting itself. If you do not have quality power, you can be supplying power that is, transient, that is causing a lot of spikes and so on. The lighting could be flickering. Imagine when the doctor is going to cut onto the patient. Accidentally, the light goes off and flickers. He may be cutting at the wrong area. The patient's life is at stake. So these are things that we need to take note of, and we have different equipments to look at. We have the power meters to be monitoring the kind of power and the kind of quality that's being provided. We have the power monitoring expert that is monitoring, and some of the graphics that you can show, you can even show how good or how bad is the quality and where is the problematic area. And of course, lastly is the EcoStruxure Power Advisor, which can do a whole lot more to tell you how to actually improve on that. Now, one of the other things that most of the digital energy eco expert, I assume that most of us today, are digital energy eco expert. We tend to forget that in Schneider, we have a whole series of solutions. When we talk about resilience, we are not only talking about reliability and quality, we are also talking about backups. When an equipment fail or when a power fail, the first thing is not to look at what went wrong. The first thing that we should be looking at, did my backup kick in? Did it kick in time? Did it interrupt or in a way stop the whole operational process in terms of operations or in terms of laboratory testing and so on? So we do have another group or another division that we are talking about, which is known as a secure power, right? We have what we call the UPSs, all right? Some of you might know, some of you might not. Those of you who do not know, please contact us, all right? We can look into all this and share with you. At the same time, there are things like known as OT panel. Very often when we talk about electrical panel, when something go wrong, you trip the power supply. In the laboratory, when they are doing testing, especially COVID-19 tests, you cannot say that when there's something wrong with an equipment, you trip the circuit and you stop the equipment. You are putting the person or the healthcare personnel at risk. So we do have such a thing known as OT panel, which our competition also have. But I think in Schneider, we did a lot more R&D into making sure that we do not have tripping or leakage tripping that will cause stoppage to any operations. All right. If you need more details on that, we can also explore. So what I'm trying to say here is that power, quality, and reliability is one of the key things that we need to look at when it comes to the energy being supplied to a critical room. All right. Going to go into the next step. Let's look at environmental control. A lot of us have heard about BMS. Very often when we talk about BMS, we only understand that it's actually for shopping center, for offices. Maybe worst case, we look at museums and archives and so on. Very few of us today know that in Schneider, we can actually do critical room control. All right. And when we talk about environmental control, on the site, on the strategy itself, if you look at the table, there are 4 main parameters that we look at. Okay, within this slide itself, the considerations are broken down into more detail so that you can read. But what I'm going to go through are the main 4 strategies that we need to look at. In a critical room, we always hear about, for those of you who are familiar with critical room control, we always listen to the word pressure regime. In fact, pressure regime actually lies second. The most important one we are talking about is air change. All right, air change is very, very important. 2 things. One is to sustain life, and at the same time, to remove all the contaminants, or if worst case, smell and odor within the room itself. You can have a very good pressure regime, but if your air change within the room is no good, all right, you can kill the people inside, whether it's a patient or whether it's a healthcare, because you allow the bacteria or the viruses to strive within those environments. So air change is very, very important. You need to have proper air change to make sure that the contaminants or the harmful materials are being removed from the room. Then only we move down to pressure. Within pressure, there are 2 types of pressure. All right, in operating theater, we talk about positive pressure. We need to make sure that the dirty things and the contaminants doesn't come into the room. But today, for COVID-19, very often we are talking about containment and isolation. Negative pressure is the one that we need to look at. All right. So with proper control between the supply air and exhaust air within the room, if we can have slightly more negative, slightly more exhaust air going out of the room with a little bit more, with a little bit less supply air coming into the room, we can achieve the negative pressure. But at the same time, by maintaining the pressure, we need to make sure that we have sufficient air change within the room itself. The third thing that we look at is filtration. Okay, very often if we look at our normal offices, we look at filtration by making sure that clean air comes into the room. But in an isolation or critical room, we need to make sure that the dirty or the contaminants are being captured, not removed, but it's being captured before the air can be exhausted out into the atmosphere. Because if we use the normal ideology that we can just supply exhaust or just pump exhaust air out into the atmosphere, you may be pumping COVID-19 into the air. You are saving the patient and the personnel, the healthcare personnel within the room, but you are contaminating the public, which is even worse. All right. So filtration is very, very important. So Schneider doesn't supply filtration equipment, but we do monitor. We monitor the filters. We can monitor HEPA filters. And sometimes we can even monitor the UV lights. UV light is also one form of filter because they actually kill off the bacteria. All right. So filtration is the third thing that we need to think about. We need to make sure we need to monitor them. For UV lights, infrared lights, we can actually turn on and off when equipments are running. So this is something that we can do within the building controls itself. Lastly, of course, temperature and humidity. This is very, very important because temperature and humidity has direct effect on the spreading or on the growing of the viruses. If you have a humid area, you are actually promoting the growth of viruses, or you are actually promoting the growth of bacteria. Temperature that are low is the worst. All right. So proper control of temperature and humidity will actually slow down the growth of the viruses or the bacteria so that it doesn't spread that fast. All right. Not to mention, temperature and humidity is also for human comfort, especially the patient's comfort as well as the healthcare personnel's comfort. Because you can understand today, through the TV, you will see they are heavily gowned. From top to bottom, they are gowned. It's going to be very warm. If you do not have proper temperature control for them, they will be perspiring within themselves. And that is also another area where viruses and bacteria could grow if they are being contaminated. We also talk about surveillance and access control, access and restriction. You do not want the public to wander or maybe just to intrude into contaminated areas. That would be a big no-no. So in Schneider, we have our EcoStructure security where we have the card access. We even have touchpads or keypads to allow access and to provide restriction. Okay. Next thing, of course, visualization. I think we all know if we can't see something, we can't react as fast. And sometimes with a properly controlled or properly configured system itself, when something happens, you can actually direct the attention of the people to the problematic area to show them exactly what is happening. This is where we can actually connect all our CCTV cameras. Okay, we can even put in sensors to make sure that we are able to see at the same time to announce and to create restrictions. All right. Lastly, of course, okay, this is one of the areas that very often most of the hospital would have ignored, or I wouldn't say ignored, they would have overlooked. All right. From patients to patients, from people to people, we need to understand where we have gone. I think today, even countries themselves are finding a big problem identifying root causes or the root, the first person to be contaminated and how the contamination goes. It is worse when it comes to a hospital. There are so many people going in and out. There are so many personnel going here and there. We need to make sure that we're able to surveillance them and able to track them, right? So we have the system that we are working with a partner known as the RTLS system that we can tag critically ill patients going in and out. All right. Okay, so with that in mind, we are covering the three very important domain, from power to building control to security and surveillance that we need to understand, that we need to look at the core principle of a critical control room. So those are words. Let's have a look at the picture. I'm taking an operating theater room as an example. All right. Let's start off with the very first one. We look at power. We have OT panel that is providing the power. And we have systems that controls the lighting within the operating theater. We have the BMS systems, all right, the building control management system that looks at to monitor the pressure, to maintain the air change, to control the temperature and humidity of the operating theater to make sure everything goes well. Card access. This is very, very critical. For normal OT room, you may not have a card access, but for critical rooms, okay, like pandemic crisis operating theater, you should have a card access. Very often people will ask me, during emergency, you're not going to press a button and go in. Yes, but we do have what we call, the infrared card or the Wi-Fi or the Bluetooth kind of distance scanning within our card where the doctors or the healthcare personnel can push the patient through the door, automatically senses and open the door for the right people and the right patient to enter. All right, that is how important a security system can be. Okay, and of course we need to connect to all the other medical systems. All right, you have the medical gases, you have the heartbeat systems, and so on and so forth, so that doctors can understand where things are going. All right. Lastly, of course, UPS. No operating theater can go without UPS. Any class 1 operating theater should be able to switch over from a power failure to the backup supply within 0.1 second. And no ATS can do that except for the UPSs. So in Schneider, we should be looking at the secure power people to understand and talk about UPSs. And at the same time, very, very few people will know that Schneider also have backup cooling systems, small cooling system that can provide cooling power to an operating theater when the main ACMV fail. All right, we can look into all that. So with all that in mind, on one threshold, on one platform, all this information can be gathered and put onto a screen to allow the healthcare personnel within the room to understand how the room is behaving, and at the same time allow the people that are outside within the maintenance personnel themselves, all right, to understand what is going on and do all the corrective measures when something goes wrong. All right. This is something that I would not like to share too much because most hospitals do not want to have this, which is known as a mobile. All right. Just to share with you, there is a possibility, but honestly, in an operating theater, very few hospitals would like to have that. But that doesn't mean that we do not have. So within a critical environment, we need to take care of all these things to ensure that a critical environment works properly at all times and is prepared every time. Right? Okay. So up to this point, I think it's more of principles which we are guiding us whether we are in a crisis or whether we are going in a normal day-to-day, normal critical room environment. Let's take a look at what pandemic crisis is all about. Today, we are right in smack in the middle of it. All right. Schneider's healthcare, we can actually be part of the fighting force against this. So let's understand what is a pandemic crisis. What are the issues that we see? Very often you will see a sudden influx of critically ill patients. We are not talking about maybe 100 or 200, all right? We are talking in terms of thousands, all right? In US alone, the last 3 days, there are 2,000 new patients going into hospital. If those of you who are actually building hospitals, how long do you take to build a hospital that's 1,000 bed? 1 year, 2 year? But every day you are increasing by 2,000 of patients into a hospital. The next thing that you will see that it is going to be a challenge for all the healthcare infrastructure, especially when it comes to containment and isolation facilities. The other thing that we always overlook is also the burden on the risk of the healthcare, the psychology on the healthcare people. Come on, they are also human. We do not want to get infected. I'm pretty sure they do not want because they have families themselves. But because it's their job, professionally, they have to face the thing head on. So we need to do something to make sure that we eliminate them, give them a more even playing ground or fighting ground. All right. A very key thing is that we always see that there's a lack of coordination. The maintenance department compared to the operational department, compared to the nurse and medical department, none of them knows what to do. Okay, they have their own protocol, but when it comes to pandemic, all these are escalated. All right. And the worst part is a lot of healthcare systems are still figuring out what to do. We do a lockdown, we push the patient away, we admit everyone, do we categorize the people? These are all the things that is going through. I think I'm just probably repeating some of the things that you guys already know. But when we put into perspective, every single one of these issues, actually during a pandemic crisis, creates the problem. And in fact, if we do not deal with it properly, it kills people. Very, very, very important. Time is of the essence. Okay, very often they need to have a single point of contact. This is the point that I would like to highlight, that when it comes to Schneider, because in terms of healthcare, when it comes to digitization, when it comes to critical solutions, we in fact have a more complete solution compared to anyone. And very often we do have a single point of contact, which I will share with you guys later down the line. So understanding this pandemic crisis, all right, what are the symptoms and how it goes through? Let's take a look at what can be done immediately. Surprisingly, it's not very difficult, all right? For any one of you who are interested, today we are in lockdown. Like myself, I can go nowhere. I'm very, very tempted to fly to certain countries who have requested my help, whom I've been talking through over the Skype, to be on site to share with them how are the solution. But unfortunately, under the lockdown, we can't do anything. And very often people tell me there's nothing I can do. No, we do have Wi-Fi, we do have phones, we do have internet. Contact with the government teams that you know. Find out where is their problem. Go through mobile, go through phone call. I think at this point in time, if somebody takes the initiative to call any government people that you are in close acquaintance with to offer them solution and help, they'll be more than happy to take your call. All right. Healthcare team, we do not only look at the government, we also have to look at the healthcare people, hospitals, you know, clinics, polyclinics. We look at private clinics. Normally, what I'm seeing so far is there's a lot of general practitioners who are asking, in fact, what they can do. All right. Can they put an extra fan, to make sure that their room is properly ventilated? All those kind of stuff. So healthcare teams covers a whole lot, not only in hospital, it covers the general. If you have any contact, again, pick up your phone, call them, talk to them, share their problems. If you have a solution, share with them. If not, come back to us if they have any inquiry. Consulting engineers, this is a big challenge today. All right. Consultant engineers, some of them are very experienced, but due to the fact that they have lack of resources and lack of immediate, and probably they are under a lot of pressure to come up with solutions. That's why a phone call to them, check with them, talk to them, ask them to send their drawing, ask them to send you their problems would help a long way. Service engineers within our department, for example, like in Singapore, we have a service team. And I'm pretty sure that some of you eco experts out there are actually servicing your hospital. Your guys on the field would have close contact with the ground people that you can have the actual problem that is happening. All right. Where we can look into the situation and try to find a solution to help your community. Ladies and gentlemen that are here today, what you are hearing is not a marketing talk. Right? I am not a salesperson. I'm a solutions architect. I'm talking in the form of we are looking at how to help the local community combat the COVID-19. And the simplest thing to do really is to get connected on the call, connected to the people. By the time we are able to get out of our home, we probably would already be in the fighting vehicle down the line to implement the solutions. All right. Lastly, of course, within Schneider Electric, you as EcoXpert, you are part of the family. Talk to all the rest of the BU. Talk to us. Because we do not only have digital energy, we have power, we have industry, we have automations and so on. Talk to every single one of them. All right. They may have contacts with hospital personnel and so on, which they have a problem or they have a situation that we may be able to help. So these are some of the steps, the very first steps that we can take in order to move. So let's go one step further. What Schneider can do or what we can do as collective. Very often when you come to a pandemic, hospital development, temporary infrastructure is very important. Most of the time we do not have enough ICU. There's ICU shortages. All right. Very often when this comes, I would like to introduce you to a word known as triage. If you look at the bottom line, I am sorry, I can't show my mouse. Oh yeah, okay. This word triage, it is a very important word. It's a very scary word when it comes to pandemic. This word actually represents the fact that if you are in a country that has a good healthcare facility, most of the patient can be accommodated. We do not need to prioritize. In situations where there is shortage of healthcare facilities and so on, people will be forced to do one thing that is most reluctant. We need to prioritize to treat the patient. Usually, easily treatable patients, strong and healthy ones would get the priority. I will not dwell into too much of those who are weak and so on, but we have seen, in fact, I have personally seen on reports coming from many different places and countries where when this priority comes in, unfortunately, the old and the weak would be put on the second or probably the third priority to be checked. So this is something that for myself, I would not like to look into it. Let's see what we can do. There are many solutions that is coming out in the market today, but two immediate things that we talk about are reconfiguring of space and constructing new spaces. Let's look into that. Let's look at the first one. The easiest one is to reconfigure the space. Okay. When we are reconfiguring a space, we need to find out where is the proper space, change what kind of department. It could be a simple patient room. By putting in simple fans, putting in simple filterings and so on, we can convert that patient room into an isolation unit. But bear in mind, all right, that room needs to have negative pressure to make sure that whatever that is coming into the room, the virus that is inside is contained within the room, all right, and is being removed in the right path and in the right direction. Gentlemen, let me highlight this one more time. We do not have a standard off-the-shelf solution for all the configuring spaces because no two spaces are the same. We are being guided by the fundamental isolation and containment principle that I've shared early on. Okay, the power, the environmental control, and the security. We need to come up with solutions for them basing on their environment. Risk assessment must be carried out. All right. If you guys need any of this more explanation and so on, please get in touch with us. I'm more than happy to share whatever that I have. All right. Let's go into a more detailed one. On your left hand side is a standard patient room, which looks something like that. All right. I can name the countries that we are talking about in US, in Australia, and to be honest with you, I've come across a few ASEAN countries who has actually come to me and said that they would like to convert the patient's room into an isolation unit. And usually the principle that you will see is on the right hand side. This is roughly what you should be doing. All right. You are controlling the pressure, making sure that the exhaust air is going in the right direction, and the exhaust air needs to be treated. When I say treated, means it has to be safe. There must be HEPA filters to filter off all the bacteria and so on, or viruses, before it's being exhausted. And in areas where they are a bit more affluent, you can even put in UV lights, to make sure you kill them, okay, not just collect them. All right. So you should look at the airflow. The arrows on the right-hand diagram, all right, actually shows the airflow. This should be the right way to do it. Sorry. It should be from the ante room, going to the patient room, then probably you move into the bathroom. That should be the right way. That should be the right flow of going. All right. So any one of you who are looking at such a thing, or any consultant and so on comes and approach you, this should be your guiding principle. Before you look into the whole room layout, how do you achieve or how do you make sure that that can be done? Now, one more thing that I've come across is that I would like to share with you is ASHRAE 170 specifies that all isolation room between the rooms should have a negative pressure of 2.5 Pascal. That is between room to room. It doesn't mean that your room needs to be controlled to minus 2.5 Pascal. All right. Controlling to minus 2.5 Pascal is almost impossible. All right. The figures that I'm giving you is just a guideline. You should work in between minus 10 to about minus 40 Pascal. Right, if that makes sense. Okay, so this is how we can actually do a generic reconfiguring of a space. This is just one example. There are many more different examples depending on the room configuration. The next thing that I would like to share with you is what we call CURA. It's a connected unit for respiratory ailments. Okay, this is another solution that is very ingenuitive. It was actually spawned because of COVID-19, because we need to have an increase in a lot of isolation containment unit. So there's one association in Italy, because we all know Italy, in fact, became one of the pandemic area, the worst pandemic area that there was. They actually came up with the idea to convert container, the container that we have into isolation containment unit. Okay, we'll share with you a video that shows what CURA is all about. CURA is not a brand name, all right? It is actually a kind of technology. Just a quick one. To construct new spaces, very often you will see people putting up tents and so on. For COVID-19, we have realized, or in fact, the global consolidated experience shows that tent is not a good solution, because due to exposure, due to breaking and so on, it is easily spread. Next thing that we are looking at, new hospital. Of course, this is pretty much quite impossible. Apart from changing the patient room to an isolation room, building a new hospital within such a short period of time is not possible. So prefabricated unit, the cheapest container is one of the best that we have. All right. So this is roughly how it looks like in general. In fact, Schneider is one of the company that has been engaged to work with Cura, the organization itself, to come up with the control measures to put in the container and to convert the container into isolation units. This is a simple form. We also talk about monitoring, etc. This is a more complicated one where you actually put in ASPs and so on to be connected to the outside room display, and it can actually be connected to a central command center for all the temporary temporary isolation units, which happens to be containers. So this is just an example of how we go. This is not a standard product that we have. Okay, one of the key things for this container is that we have been given a commitment that this container units will come fully equipped, fully programmed, fully furnished and everything. All you need to do is plug in the right power supply and it should be up and running in within 4 hours. All right. Of course, it will take the time of delivery, but for the container unit to be shipped to the site, from site to set up, it will take probably about 4 hours. All right. Okay. So we have looked at the principles, we have looked at what we can do at a pandemic in a general view. How do we transform the fight? 2003, we had the SARS. At that time, information was very, very lacking. Getting of information, people were dying for no apparent reason, which we do not know why. Today, with IoT and so on, we should transform that. The next few slides, which I'm not going to go through in detail, I will share with you how digitization is actually able, to provide the necessary possibilities during a crisis. This is just some of them. I'll just give you an example. When it comes to monitoring of the air change, monitoring of the pressure control, monitoring of the power supply, the quality, and so on, even for temporary units, you only need to set up one command center where they are properly connected within the systems. All the data can be provided. I have received a question which shares with me, come on, CK, you are telling me now that you're still selling your EBO. I say no. The reason why I need to bring this up is because very often in temporary units, data is lacking. We do not know how is the performance, how well the place is placed under quarantine, or how well the place is being managed, and how well the patients are coming in and out. This data becomes critical to those areas. In a hospital, if the systems are connected, they can get this. But in a newly built area, in a large field where the containers are being just set up and so on, this critical data for the patients need to be monitored to give the authorities a feel, to give the authorities insight to how the thing is operated, how well the thing is performing, and how fast patients are recovering. All right. So digitization is very, very important. Today, a few of the countries that has done very, very well. I think I'm not going to name a few, but you already know. All right. I think up in the north, we already saw a few countries. In the south, there's a few more coming up. All right. Data is very, very important. So digitization is in fact one of the solutions, all right, to help fight the crisis, a pandemic that is growing exponentially. In the past, we have been talking when it comes to hospital, everyone has been asking me for a solution. All right. Even our global team is telling us there is no solution for a crisis, because in crisis, you cannot get a supply chain. You can only work with what you have. So what do you need to do? Look at the problematic as a whole. Find out what are the problems. Find out where is the key problem, whether they want to convert a room into an isolation unit, or they want to set up a new place, or they just want to monitor the quality of the power, or make sure that the reliability in terms of power is up. We need to understand that. All right. Then look within your own arsenal to see what are the things that are available, because there's no way you can wait 3 to 4 weeks for delivery to come in and another week to build a unit. All right. So we have to look at the view from a different way. We have to look at who are the people that are using it. What is it meant for? Define the function. All right. Then we look at whatever we have within our stockpile that we can help to change. Think out of the box, okay? Everything goes. I'll share with you an example here. Very often when we talk about operating theater, we talk about positive pressure. The room has to be clean because we are cutting people open. I'll share with you an example, okay? This one, I'm allowed to say this because in UK, there's one hospital which is meant for COVID-19. They have actually converted an operating theater into a negative pressure room, just to make sure that the COVID-19 stays in the room when they're operating on a COVID-19 infected patient. So we are, in fact, in a way, throwing out whatever we have understood so far. So the point here is that when it comes to crisis management, all right, think out of the box, look at the situation. The key guideline to designing a whole system is saving life, making sure healthcare people are safe, all right, and time. Time is the line between life and death, all right? That is how bad the thing is. When we are sitting within our living room, hearing all this is simple, but in the real world, it's not a good sight, all right? So a lot of us, we are doing services. There are things that we can do, help those that are already connected up. We can provide 24-hour services within our service team that has contract with hospitals or even with any healthcare facility, help them. I will share with you one example that is being done here in Singapore. In the Singapore service team has put up a 24-hour hotline, to all hospitals that are associated with us. As long as there's a system problem, as long as the hospital needs something, they can call this hotline and we will respond within 2 hours, whether it's via phone or whether it's, when there's something fail and so on, it's site attendance. All right. So I would probably suggest that if any one of you or outside who are capable of doing this, connect up your facilities, provide them with this one so that you can at the first hand when things happen. All right. Schneider Electric would like to be part of the fighting force against COVID-19 with your help and with your support. Let's win this battle together. We do not only want to win battles, we would like to win the war together.